Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny Sichel, and I'm a Whole Being Athlete Ambassador. And I am super excited to talk to you today about mental health and my journey with mental health. And I also have Maya Asha here to chat a little bit more. Maya?
Hey, I'm Maya Asha. I'm also a whole being athlete ambassador, and just really excited to work with Athletes for Hope and this platform talking about mental health. And today, just this conversation, I think it's really important.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I guess I'll share a little bit about what my mental health journey has been like because it's definitely impacted my athletic career, and I mean, it's made me who I am today. And I love who I am today. So I'm like, great, let's go. But it hasn't always been easy along the way.
Yeah.
So just to give everybody an idea of who I am, basically, I am a 2016 Rio Paralympian. I was a coxswain in the Team USA boat and won a silver medal with my boat. And then I also coached in in Tokyo 2021 for the US Paralympic team in rowing as well. So outside of that, I work as an operations director at a disability advocacy organization, National Council on Independent Living, and recently got my master's degree. And so the reason I'm chatting about like mental health is because I myself have obsessive compulsive disorder, and it's pretty severe, and it has really affected me since before college, probably since like fifth grade, fourth grade. But I actually went undiagnosed for 11 years, and
Wow.
then got diagnosed my sophomore year of college. And when I got diagnosed with OCD, it was like someone had like kind of flipped the switch and been like, oh, this is what like your mental health challenges. And I started crying
Hmm.
because it was just like, oh my God, somebody understands me. Like somebody gets me. What? And so, I mean, we can chat a little bit more, but that's kind of like my brief into who I am and my mental health. And I don't know much about you, Maya. So I'd love to hear a little bit
That's
more
okay.
about you
I'm,
too.
I'm like, how do I follow up with that? She's so amazing.
Oh my God.
So I
Just
actually
wait.
was an athlete. I was actually a junior Olympian. So I hit the Olympics when I was a kid. So I ran track and field for about 15 years, I believe. And I actually got to college, but I had to stop running because of injuries. And so my battles, similar to you, I really discovered that I was dealing with depression and anxiety about the same time you. It was my junior year of college. And now depression, not so much, anxiety, still very much present. But, just going through that journey with stopping sports and kind of going into something else and trying to deal with my mental health in a different capacity has forced me into a lot of things. One of those things being pageants. So I'm still a competitor. I call myself the glam athlete.
That's so
So
cool.
I'm actually Miss Palm Beach County, USA. So Palm Beach County is in South Florida, and I'm running for Miss Florida USA this at the end of this month, actually at the end of May. And it has been a journey, like you said. You don't realize how mental health impacts you until someone says like, "Hey, this is something's going on, something is wrong." And I think that was kind of how the experience was for me. I knew things were there, but I always had my sport to kind of pull me out of it, right? Or I always had the tough girl, you can get through this. And so I think with that mindset and with that idea, dealing with mental health for me wasn't really a conversation that was had until I was forced to look in the mirror and, dealing with my own depression and anxiety at kind of the worst circumstances and having somebody recognize like, hey, you need to go get help. And when I went to go get help, they said, hey, you've been dealing with this probably for a while. And so having that conversation and having that diagnosis at that time was really important for me. I was even more inspired. I unfortunately lost a very close family friend about in 2019, the end of 2020, going into 2020. And he was an athlete. He was one of the top recruits in the country for football. And it was by suicide, and he was just struggling and he just didn't talk about it. So for me, my inspiration really has just been understanding what those thoughts feel like, understanding dealing with anxiety and depression and kind of dealing with the embarrassment and all the other things that come along with it, and not maybe having people behind you that understand that it's not just a spa day treatment. Like there are things that you actually have to go through. And so kind of sharing my story, but then also letting people know that there are resources available to them has kind of been my inspiration for this journey.
Yeah. And I mean, you were sort of talking about kind of learning about your mental health. Were you ever sort of bothered by discrimination or thought about discrimination because of your mental health?
You know, it's interesting. So my family's not from this country. My family's from Trinidad and Tobago. And I think even African American. So my dad's African American, my mom's Trinidadian. And so I think in Black culture, right, it's kind of encompassing Black together, we don't talk about mental health. It's not really a topic. You know, there are a lot of other things that they try to push you towards. Even now, like when I first explained to my dad, like, hey, I'm going to go back into therapy. You know, like I think I need it again. I think that I'm just in a place where it'll help me out a little bit. He was like, you know, why are you doing that? Why are you, where here are the other options that you can do? So I think that aspect of it, but then also I felt kind of my inadequacies because I come from kind of a rough background, right? And so having those resources available to me in my community were so few. So having that, being comfortable to have that conversation, and then finding places where you don't have, maybe if you don't have health insurance, or maybe you don't have the connections to people that understand mental health at a medical capacity. I think that was kind of my dealing with discrimination, maybe like dealing with financial barriers, right? Like your financial class. And then if anything, just having that conversation amongst communities that aren't used to it. In this case, my family.
Yeah.
What about you?
I was just thinking about it. I think that for me, the fear of discrimination has really sort of paved my way on my sports and athletic journey. I didn't initially, so to give everyone an idea of my journey, basically, I was in college, started out rowing in college as a rower, got injured, switched over to coxing, which is like the little person in the boat that shouts at people and steers. Mm-hmm. So I'm really good at telling people what to do. But got into coxing and then was like, oh, I want to see how far I can go with this. And as it ended up, I actually had some sexual harassment from a coach against me, and that totally changed my path. And I was like, well, I can't go coach with this coach this season. So I guess I'm going to go try out for a pre-elite club. And at that pre-elite club is where I ended up randomly coxing the national team coach at the time, the adaptive national team coach at the time. And she's like, hey, you're pretty good. Can I get your name and number? And I was like, sure, I'll cox for this boat club again. And then a couple weeks later, she was like, oh, by the way, I'm the adaptive national team coach and I want you to come try out. I was like, great. Okay. Wow. This is big. And so I ended up, this was in like 2010. I'm aging myself right now, or 2009, something like that. But it ended up that where I'm going with this story is, so I actually made my first national team in 2010. And then in 2011, I disclosed my mental health to the coach, which I was like, I'm going to be strong. I'm going to do this. And then like a week later during selection camp, I ended up not making the boat.
Wow.
And I didn't make the boat in 2012 either under this coach. And I wasn't sure if that was related to my discrimination or if it was just my OCD being like, well, if this, then this. Like, if you because you told the coach you're not going to make the team now. Something like that. So, like, I don't actually know. Like, could also be because I sucked. I don't know. But, yeah, I think that because I didn't know why I hadn't made the team and like whole story behind it, like getting lied to, that kind of stuff. But I refused to disclose my mental health to anyone else.
Yeah, I think that's the big part about dealing with any type of mental illness, whether temporary or lifelong. I think that people don't understand the level of almost like you almost feel like you're walking into shame or you're walking into
Mm-hmm.
embarrassment, and you don't want that to be the reason that people look at you differently. And I think that comes along with the stigma. If you do have OCD, if you are depressed, if you
Yeah,
are anxious, are you crazy? Like that's the first thing that you think
it's
people are going
true.
to think
It's
about
so
you,
true.
unfortunately. And so I think that one, when you hide it, I think hiding it makes life harder for
Oh
me.
my God, it's
I like
horrible.
if I don't talk about it, or if I try to explain to somebody like, hey, I'm having a really rough day. My rough day isn't just kind of an emotional thing. It's like sometimes the medical thing that I'm dealing with
Yeah.
mentally. And so when there's that fear of just being vulnerable and saying like, hey, I have this issue, because there are people, and you meet them where they totally have no regard for it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes you try to be patient because they don't, a lack of understanding.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have people that do understand, and they're just kind of like, okay, well, I don't have the patience for it. I don't have to deal with it. And it's kind of dismissive.
Yeah.
And so, as not only someone who deals with mental health, as a Black woman, as a
Mm-hmm.
minority, and then
Yep.
dealing with mental health, I feel like, sometimes I run into these days, I'm like, geez, I don't know which one I'm going to be fighting
Oh,
today.
completely. Completely. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like, I think that, I mean, even with the sports, like your coach doesn't want a weak player
Right.
on their team.
Yes.
Um, and I think that in and of itself can be discriminatory,
Yeah.
whether that be against your race, against your gender, against your disability,
Right.
whatever it might be. And I think that also like very much speaks to mental health because it's often viewed as weakness.
Right.
Where like I personally view it as one of my strengths, and it's one of the reasons that I'm so competitive and so meticulous and have grown so much and have no fear anymore. Um,
Yeah.
but I think that a lot of coaches view it as like, oh, you're less than. You're
Yeah.
like less than our star athlete, even though you may be better than them. Doesn't matter. What if they have an anxiety or a mental breakdown on the field?
Yeah. And how do you deal with that? How do you
Mm-hmm.
learn about dealing with that? How do you coach that person out of that situation?
Yeah.
I think for me, with my experience in discrimination and how it's really impacted my mental health, I think because I discovered it later on,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of crossroads between sports and mental health, it didn't cross too much. Um, but now I can say, like, as a coach or as someone who still deals with sports and works in sports, I think that it kind of ties back into that conversation of being shy about the conversation and taking the time to educate the people around you. And sometimes that makes me more anxious.
Right.
And so it doesn't really help the situation. I get ready and I'm like, man, I need to get past this and have
Yeah.
a conversation about it. But then I'm like, oh, I'm dealing with this anxiety, which is adding to more of the issue.
Oh my
So
God.
I
Yeah.
think for me, it heightens it in a sense. I don't think people realize that when you discriminate against somebody in whatever capacity, if they are dealing with a mental health issue, for me, it heightens the issue. It makes it worse,
Yeah.
and so it's nice to, and it's not to like all people are bad, right? It's nice
No.
to have people in spaces to have the conversation, or at least one person. Like I always, if I can give like advice to anybody dealing with this, I always try to find one person in that space that I'm working at, whether it's in pageants, whether it's at my job, whether it's on the field
Mm-hmm.
coaching. I always try to find one person and say, hey, this is what I deal with on a regular basis. So if I have to take a day, just kind of be a little bit patient with me. Or if I seem aloof or out of it or disengaged, just like be a little bit patient with me and kind of understand that my mind is moving a mile a minute and I'm
Yeah.
trying to slow it down to be present.
Yeah. I think that's such valuable advice, because I think that often, as we've been saying, when we talk about mental health, we don't necessarily give ourselves the option to tell people, hey, just give me a couple seconds or whatever it is, because we don't want that like stigma. We don't want to face that
Yeah.
like scary factor that we can't necessarily control.
Right. Right.
But I do think that it's so important. Like when I'll tell people, now that I'm open to talking about my mental health, I'll actually tell people like, oh yeah, you saw those stairs. Yeah. I skipped a step. Yep. That was because of this. And they're like, oh my God, are you okay? And I'm like, no, I'm fine. Just if you see me skip another step, the best thing you can do is tell me, Jenny, you're skipping a step. Cause I may not even notice that I'm doing it at this point.
Wow.
And like, or they'll be like, do you want me to stop doing this? Like, do you want me to stop? Like, if this is triggering you, do you want me to stop? And I'm like, no, like OCD is about habituation and getting past that anxiety curve, that the top of the anxiety curve. With the compulsions. And if you stop, that's almost like a compulsion where I'm not reaching the top of my anxiety curve. So the next time I get anxiety about that, it'll continue going up.
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
that bell curve will keep going up and keep going up and keep going up. So no, I want you to tell me. I want you to like cut me off kind of thing, because that will help me. And that also gives you an idea of what I'm going through too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely a huge help. I think for me, I always, my friends know like, hey, Maya, slow down, or hey, Maya, stop.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, I'm stopping.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a second, even my pageant coach, one of my pageant coaches, we talk about kind of our journey in pageantry and, just why we care about the things that we care about and why we do what we do. And so my coaches obviously know. So in coaching, they will literally say, Maya, take a breath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
so
an awesome coach though.
Yeah. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. So it definitely helps out.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I did want to ask you one question. And so feel free not to answer this, but I'm very interested, and I don't know why I thought about this, but you were talking about sort of how you got to the realization about your mental health. And did you have anyone close to you? Like, was there anyone there, or have you like been in situations where you've been supported by people? With
It's
this?
so interesting. So my realization, I'm comfortable talking about it. So I almost
Mhm.
committed suicide. And it was pretty kind of a really dark time. I was actually around the time that we were leaving campus for on finals. I can't remember if it was spring or fall. I want to say it was spring. And I was dating somebody seriously at the time. My mom and I were on great terms, so everybody in my life was like, I was in okay space with them. But I don't think what people realize with depression specifically is that when you just aren't there, there's not much anybody else can do to pull you out of it unless you're getting like medical help or like actual treatment for it, or you're fortunate enough to kind of find that space. I did have, so at the time when I was considering, the day that I was considering, I just kind of stopped. I had a moment where I was able to pull myself out of it. And as I was leaving the building, my friend saw me and he said, actually one of my best friends, he was like, hey, you're not okay. I don't know what's going on. He didn't, I think he knows, but he saw it and he was just like, hey, I've been talking to the on-campus therapist. I think you should go. And I'm like, yeah, but what if they say something's wrong with me? So I was actually afraid that something was wrong with me.
Yeah.
Because, I didn't let people in my room. My room was atrocious. Like I remember my the guy that I was dating at the time, we went into my room to go get something. So I was spending a lot of time in his room. And we opened the door and he looked and he was like amazed. So like even little things like cleaning and like, I had everything everywhere. It was bad. It was really bad. But I look at it now and I'm like, oh my gosh, something was wrong with me. But then I just realized, I just felt like I just hadn't cleaned my room in a really long time, when I'm probably one of the cleanest people that he knew. So, little things like that, people see it, but I don't think it sticks with them because they don't necessarily understand. But now, because I'm comfortable talking about it, people have learned that like, okay, these are signs of what depression looks like. These are signs of somebody dealing with anxiety. And, so I did have people around me. I did have a support system. They probably saw glimpses, but I'm also a person that's like, I wear it well, so it's high functioning depression. It was high functioning depression, right? I leave my room. She's doing great on campus. She's president of this organization. She's smiling. She's laughing. She's cheerful. But if you leave me in a moment by myself, I was a wreck, and so the signs can be difficult to see, but they are there.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of having the conversations and letting people know what those signs look like. And I'm fortunate and blessed to have that friend that was so in tune with me, just realizing like that day I was like really just I was ready to go. And he looked at me and he was just like, let's just go. He was like, do you want me to walk you over? And I'm like, no. And he was like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah. And I just went over and I just started pouring. I think I was with that therapist for maybe like 2 or 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And she, even at that time, was like, I think I even took I think I cheated the evaluation form. I think I was so afraid of something being wrong with me that I was answering these questions. And I'm like, no, I'm not depressed. No, I'm not this, right? And I'm like, and this, I'm looking, but you read these questions, right? And I'm like, maybe I am sad, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you know, I'm thinking it, but I'm like, nah, nothing's wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with me. And I went in and she was just like, and she just let me talk. You know, she just let me pour out. And she literally said to me, her name was Angel. I will never forget this. Isn't that ironic? Yeah. She literally said to me, and she's just like, hey, I need you to refill out this form. And I'm like, why? And she was just like, I think there's more that you need to talk about. I think we need to meet a few more times. And I'm like, okay. You know, so at that point, I was fortunate to have people to see it, but I didn't really like I think it was just timing. I did pull myself out of it. You know, I don't think that if I didn't pull myself out of it, I wouldn't have seen my friend.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be here now.
Yeah.
So the support system is there. Depression is just one of those things. It's a tricky monster, especially if it's high functioning.
Yeah.
You know, if you see somebody and they say they're okay, like I'm the friend, if people ask me, oh, I'm good. I'm still kind of like that, but now I know when I'm not good and to say it. But I think what's the most important part about depression and dealing with it at that level, especially someone who's high functioning, is just really saying, like, if you see a sign and you feel like it's just really beyond that person's character, then maybe not even just you. I mean, it depends on the person you're dealing with. Some people deal with, you know, the straight shot, like, hey, I want you to go see a therapist or something's really wrong. Whereas other people, they might need kind of that soft nudge into finding help or kind of that hand holding, you know, and so it depends. But if you see something, say something. I think that's the most powerful thing about it.
Yeah. And it's like, it's so scary because, so with me, and the reason I asked that was because with me, it was kind of twofold. Like, because I've had it since 5th grade, my parents noticed it before I did. Like, honestly, in 5th grade, I thought my parents were going to poison me. And like literally I would it was bad. I would have to go and like get little bottles of shampoo because I was afraid they put poison in my and so like it had to be a new bottle from the store so that I knew that they hadn't poisoned it.
Wow.
It was really bad. So that was like their first like clue that like something wasn't right with me. I mean, I did make them get me little mini donuts and orange juice every morning. I don't know whether that was my OCD or just me being a smart child, but it worked. So I got mini donuts, chocolate covered mini donuts, and orange juice.
Any way you can get it,
you know. And then I have this thing with food because then, in order to get me to go see the therapist and the psychiatrist on Saturdays, they would get me a little honey bun.
Yeah.
Orange juice.
This is what you've heard. So how was that? I guess for me, right? So when you figure it out in adult life, it is hard.
Yeah.
That adjustment because you spend your entire life, and even like I look back now and I'm like, man, I had so many signs.
Oh yeah.
So I had, you know, kind of getting that diagnosis older. It's different.
Yeah.
For you growing up with it, you know, sometimes I wish I knew as a child, but then I'm like, I don't know if I wish I would have known because I feel like almost it would have taken me from my childhood. So what was that like for you, kind of navigating that as a kid?
I think because I just thought I had anxiety, it wasn't too, like, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was. And it seemed very real in my head. Everything seemed very real. And so I would do the compulsions to stop the anxiety from happening. And I may have like not told the entire truth to the therapist at first. Which could be why I got the misdiagnosis for 11 years.
Yeah.
But I remember, like, you talk about as an adult, like, I feel like I am almost able to conceptualize it a little bit more what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But as a kid, I remember when my psychiatrist was like, told my parents, we need to put her on meds.
Wow.
And I remember getting in the car screaming and crying at my mom, like, I'm not going on meds. Like, because I had that stigma that meds were for crazy people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like, I'm just a normal person. Like, yeah, I'll talk to a psychiatrist, but like, I'm not going on meds because that really means something's wrong. Um,
Mm.
and I ended up going on meds, and they completely helped. And then I went off the meds my like junior year of high school, something
Mm-hmm.
like that. I was doing great. Like, I was quirky, but it wasn't like obvious. I was really good at hiding it. Like, really,
Yeah.
really good at hiding it.
It's so funny. I feel like everybody that I know that's dealt with it at any level knows how to hide it.
Yeah. Like, literally, you'd have no clue that I had OCD or that I had
Yeah.
any, like, you would just think, oh yeah, she's got some superstitions, that kind
Mm.
of thing. But then in college, stress is a trigger for it. And so in college, when college started, you talk about a dirty room. It was nasty, and I had a
Yeah.
roommate. Um,
Oh,
and
wow.
even to my senior year, so I realized myself something was wrong after my freshman year, and I told my mom, like, Mom, I need to go talk to someone. And because
Mm-hmm.
I had had that growing up, like, and it being okay growing up to go talk to someone, and I had that knowledge that something wasn't right, so I needed to say something. Um, but funny story about freshman year hallmates. Senior year comes, and by this point, I'm diagnosed with OCD. I'm doing great, living life, loving it,
Mm-hmm.
loving college finally. And I see my, and I see my freshman year hallmates in the cafeteria, and I go, "Oh, hey, you guys have an extra seat? You mind if I sit down? I haven't chatted with you in a while." And they go, um, "There are no extra seats."
Wow.
Um, yeah, and that was the
Wow.
stigma associated with the mental health disability that I had, blatant in my face.
Wow.
Like, I was known as the weird one on the hall, and they didn't want to interact with me because I was weird.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, um, it hasn't been as blatant for me. I think
Mhm.
that it's where it shows up is that even though my family cares and they know, as far as taking the conversation seriously and really understanding at what capacity that I have to deal with it at, I don't think they understand it. And I think they try their best to understand it, but because there's such this heavy stigma behind being crazy or something wrong or whatever, like I don't think they understand the value that therapy has had for me. Fortunately, like I did have, they did ask me to take an antidepressant in college. I refused to take it.
I know that
I,
feeling.
I went through that. I refused to take it. But with therapy was my medicine. Just because even the one thing that they all pointed out was just like, you just hold on to everything. You're not talking about anything, and you're just dealing with this sadness on a day-to-day basis, and you're just kind of a bottle of all of these emotions. And so I think with my family, it's like, well, why don't you just have a conversation? And it's like, sometimes it's not just a conversation. Sometimes it's navigating. I will never forget in my second bout of therapy.
Yeah.
My therapist asked me to do like the most ridiculous thing. So I don't like talking to people very much. I've
Really?
learned to do it.
I would
I've
be like,
learned to do it.
I would literally be like, "Are you kidding me? You don't like talking to people? I'm having a blast talking to you right now because you're just, it's like so much fun to chat with you."
This is fine with me, but like if
Yeah.
you put me with a whole bunch of, I'm like, Jesus Christ. The only time I'm not like that is on stage. It's the strangest thing. But so she actually made me, one of the things she gave me to do was I needed to every time I go to the grocery store, she's like, do you make grocery lists? And I'm like, yeah, I can't function without lists. My entire life is lists because otherwise my anxiety is all over the place. I have
Yeah.
to stay very organized. And so she says, great, perfect, because I know you like your list. When you go into the grocery store, you need to ask where every single item is on your list. And I'm like, I go grocery shopping twice a month. Do you know how many groceries that is? And she was like, yes. And I'm like, every single item? And she was like, yes. And I'm like, I don't like this. I don't get this. So our whole thing was homework with me being a teacher now.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I'm not doing this homework. Can I just take the zero? And so he was like, no, you need to do this one. And I was going around and I'm like, why am I so nervous about asking somebody where the bread is? Like, I should not be nervous about it. But then later on, she's just like, one, asking for help, and then two, being vulnerable and saying, like, hey, I can't deal with this on my own. Right. And so her teaching me how to have that conversation with my family, even though sometimes they don't understand, or teaching me to just simply say I'm not okay right now, or navigating my anxiety when I do feel most anxious. How am I dealing with that, right? And in that case, it's like, if you can't find this one item, are you going to run around the grocery store for 30 minutes looking for it, or are you actually going to stop, take a breath, and then ask somebody where that item is, right? And so that one tool changed everything for me, right? And that's not something that, and it's no disregard to anybody uh, uh, in my support system, but that's not something that anybody would give you on a regular basis. Like, nobody's going to tell you to go to the grocery store and ask for every item, just to, with that kind of depth. So
Yeah.
I think that the regard for therapists and the regard for people that special psychologists and psychiatrists need to be like taken so much more seriously, because they're trained professionals that teach you, that give you tools, that give you medication in order for you to navigate your mental health on a completely different level.
Oh, completely. Completely. And I don't think there should be any shame with going
Yes.
to speak with someone, going to speak to psychologists, going to speak to therapists, a psychiatrist. There should be no shame in that. Everybody's got their skeletons. Like, if you sprain an ankle, you're not going to not seek help for it. Like, you're not going to get a cast on it, or you break an ankle, you're not going to get a cast on it.
Right. And and I don't think backgrounds, whether it be
Yeah.
physical disability or cultural differences or whatever, or classism, right? I don't think those
Yeah.
should influence anybody asking for help either. I think that sometimes it is hard because you already feel like you have these stigmas attached to you and you don't want another one. But there's so much power in vulnerability. And I think that's the one thing that I preach, especially when it comes to mental health. Like, when you
Oh my
can
God.
talk about it, and when you can tell people, like, this is what's going on, this is how I deal with things, people are willing to learn and listen, you feel so much more free. And
It's
you feel like you have this space to be yourself, and that's so liberating. Like, I don't know how to describe it.
no, I know I'm getting chills because I know exactly what you're talking about. And I think that's why, like, I want to talk about it too. And like, why I wanted to kind of engage in this whole being athlete, as like a mental health ambassador, because I think that speaking about it not only breaks the stigma, but it also helps you,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
makes you stronger. And like, I'm like, if I can speak about this to people, I can take on anything. I can take on the starting line of the Paralympics. Like,
Yeah.
and it's actually harder talking about my mental health disability
Yeah.
in
It
some
is.
regards. Like,
It is, because it's just so different, and it's something that people don't understand. And when you finally have the guts to say it and stand firm in it, and like, hey, this is who I am,
yeah. And like,
it changes everything. And for
yeah.
me, just kind of similar to you, just
Mm-hmm.
being able to have open conversations about it and not be ashamed of the dark end of my story, and just saying, like, hey, yeah, this happened, but I found help. I found a resource to
Yeah.
get me through this. I deal with it on a regular basis, and I know I have the strength to deal with whatever mental health issue it is. And so platforms like Whole Being Athlete is so powerful, not just for education purposes and kind of letting people know, like, hey, you're not alone, and there are people that you can connect to, but really and truly, like you said, that personal, like, reminder that
Yeah.
I'm here. I've done this. I'm standing in this, and I'm proud of who I am and how far I've come on this journey. It really is a great feeling.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's to each their own with speaking about it,
Yeah.
and talking about it. And I think
Yeah.
some people, like, it may not help them to talk about it. But I
Right.
think that being aware and being open and okay with seeking help, with like the stigma that comes along with it, it goes a long way.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely agree. So for me, this next year, I am hoping that my story is an inspiration for other people. I hope that, my words have power in their lives and really just helps them transform into the person that they want to be. I think that's really what I want. It's not to be ashamed of, Bryce's story, who's passed away, my story, and just sharing that and saying like, hey, there are options for you. There are people that are going through the same thing, and this is one space that I'm able to do it in.
Yeah. Cheers to that. It's so true. It's so true. But that was
All
awesome.
right, Jenny, this was great.
That was so much fun. Oh my God.
It was
You are
great. It was
amazing.
great. You too. I'm like, oh, I met a new girl boss. I like her.
Right?
Oh man. All right. Well, thank you so much, Athletes for Hope, for having
Yes.
us. This was a blast. And whatever conversations you want us to join in on, we are around. We'll be here. Please feel free to reach out.